Next up, Megan Johnson, you can go ahead and share your screen. Megan's going to talk about some of the work she's been doing on public perception of prescribed fire. Megan's a graduate research assistant at North Carolina State University, studying to get her PhD under Dr. Fernando Garcia Menendez. Megan, you should be able to go ahead and go.
Great, thanks, Laurel. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks for that introduction, Laurel. I am a PhD student at North Carolina State University, and I study air quality and smoke modeling. So doing a public perception survey is a little bit different for me, but we found it to be really interesting. And we collaborated with the state parks on this because we wanted to try to understand North Carolina residents' knowledge and perceptions of wildland fire and smoke so that we could use that information to create more effective educational and communications material in the future. And because I'm an engineer, we started out by looking at a previous survey, looking at perceptions and knowledge, one that was done by phone by the Forest Service. And we decided that using several of the questions that they had on wildland fire would be a good idea so that we could, create good questions, but also have something to compare to either on a national level or, in some cases they had some regional analysis, which was helpful. And we crafted some of our own questions as well, but it was really nice to have some things to compare back to here. And we shared this survey electronically, and this was starting back in September of last year. And it was mainly shared through the state park's social media channels, but we also got it shared through various listservs of a lot of the people that are here today. So thank you for doing that. If you did that, I really appreciate it. And because I only have a few minutes to talk about our results, and we had a lot of different questions, I chose to look at some of the ones that are a little more focused on prescribed fire, and looking at how potentially the proximity to burning activity could impact the way people responded to some of these questions. And because we collaborated with state parks, our main metric for looking at burning activity is burning that has occurred in state parks. So it's not going to capture burning activity all across the state because there are obviously a lot of people doing it. But it was a good first. We also wanted to look at potential WUI classification to see if that had any kind of impact. So first, here, just showing kind of a map of our responses across the state by zip code. The darker the color, the more responses we had from that zip code. And the circles that you're seeing here are representative of a 20-kilometer radius around state parks where we have burning information from recent history. And if those circles have a star in them, those were parks that had what we consider to be a higher burning activity in recent history. And so we kind of did a little bit of slicing and dicing of our results this way. And in total, we had approximately 750 responses up through March of this year, back when things kind of shut down. And so, like I said, we also wanted to see how potential WUI classification could affect these results. So we were really focusing on how people in an interface or an intermix area might respond versus how people in a low density population but vegetated area might respond versus those in an urban area. So we have kind of responses from across the board here. So to start, there's a lot of text here, don't worry about it. I'm going to go through all these questions, but what we're focusing on first is the knowledge and awareness questions that I kind of chose to talk about today. So the first question we asked was, do you know the difference between wildfire and prescribed fire? And when we look at all the responses across the board, it's a resounding yes. Over 96% of our respondents say they know the difference, which is great. This is good, a good start for North Carolina. And so when we look at this parks, it's a similar percentage when you're looking at people around parks, but then a much higher percentage, well, not much, it's a 4% difference maybe, for those living in near high burn park areas. But the main thing to notice there too is that we have less uncertainty from respondents in that area. And then when we look at it based on WUI classification, again, still very high response percentages there, slightly more uncertainty from those living in a less densely populated vegetated area. But interestingly, all of our urban responses were that they know what the difference is, which is kind of cool, but also a little bit surprising. And so we also asked if prescribed fire was used on land near our respondents' homes, and we expected there to be quite a bit of difference in the responses here, and that's what we are seeing. We are seeing that those who live closer to parks in general are saying yes, that there is some burning occurring there. But it's kind of interesting that only 70% of those living near high burn parks know that there's burning occurring there. And obviously, there could be some differing interpretation of the word near, or if you're living near this burning, especially if we're looking at a 20-kilometer radius. So there could be a little bit of something that we're missing there. based on the terminology. And of those who said yes to this previous question, we wanted to know if they knew who or where the burning was happening. And generally, most people said that state land was the leading answer there. That also may have been partially because we shared mostly the survey through state parks services. But there are people still recognizing that it's obviously happening on federal and private lands alike across the board. And so like I said, I'm a student who studies air quality, so I asked this question because I'm interested in this. I wanted to know if people are aware of any type of a health condition that may make them especially vulnerable to potential health impacts from fire smoke. And what I thought was interesting here is that across the board, except for the high burn category, most people, are responding very similarly, but that over 50, about 50% of our respondents from people living near these high burn parks think that they have a potential health condition that might make them more vulnerable to smoke impacts. Obviously, the way we crafted this survey, we're not necessarily able to know if that's true, but it's an interesting thing that we've noticed here. And finally, in kind of this knowledge and awareness category, we had a couple of true-false questions just to see what people said. First one was whether prescribed fire can reduce wildfire risk. We're getting a resounding true there. Again, lowest uncertainty in kind of a high burning area. Whether prescribed fires kill most trees in the burned area, a resounding false across the board, which is nice to see. And whether prescribed fire improves wildlife habitat, we get about an 80% true rate across the board there. Again, lower uncertainty for those near the high burn area. And so I wanted to also highlight a couple of these kind of trust and concern questions that we wanted to ask, and the results, how they compare to previous surveys, especially looking at kind of the southern region of the US. So this first question is whether land managers can be trusted to make good decisions regarding dealing with wildfire risk. And we've got high levels of trust in North Carolina, which is nice to see. And interestingly, our urban respondents have a slightly higher level of trust, which is kind of cool. And when we compare this to the previous survey results, looking at specifically the southern region, we're also seeing a slightly higher percentage of trust as well. In the southern region, it was about 71%, and we're looking at close to 85 across the board there. And then when we asked if land managers should use prescribed fire as part of a wildfire management program, again, we have a pretty high agreement percentage there. And interestingly, a lower percentage of our urban respondents said that they agree with this, especially based on the way that they kind of responded to the first question, but that is what it is. And when we compare this to the previous results from the national survey, it's a similar kind of agreement rate there, around 90%, 91%. We also asked respondents to kind of rate what their level of concern is regarding smoke from prescribed fire. And overall, it doesn't differ a whole lot across these proximity categories. There's a slight difference here or there, but really what kind of pops out is that we have about 40% of respondents who are not concerned about the smoke, and then another 40% of respondents who are only mildly concerned. And when we compare this back to the previous survey, we kind of changed our answer options here, where they had 3 before, we have 4 now. And so it's not too different. We are seeing maybe a slightly lower percentage of not concerned here in North Carolina, but they do have more options in terms of their answers. So there's something else to take into account there. And finally, we wanted to see how people might kind of qualify prescribed fire smoke if we gave them a few different options. So what you're seeing here, there might be a lot of kind of things going on, but mainly we wanted to ask whether people were concerned about it in terms of public health or travel and visibility, which is those orange bars, or whether they were okay with it in terms of it being acceptably managed, being a necessary inconvenience, or if it's never been an issue for them. And finally, we want to know if maybe they just don't think it's worth using because of the smoke. That was a very small percentage across the board, which is great. I think maybe 5 people total who took this survey said that was the case. And we're also seeing lower concern in terms of public health impacts and impacts on travel and visibility, which is great. And we're also seeing a high percentage of people across the board saying that they think it's acceptably managed or isn't an issue or is a necessary inconvenience. So just to sum that all up, we're seeing that we do have a high level of trust in land management and prescribed fire use in our state, which is great, as well as a low level of concern regarding impacts from prescribed fire, smoke in particular. And we're also seeing that, there are maybe some differences in how people respond based on where they're living, whether they're living close to these high burn parks or in a lowly, densely populated area, especially regarding their uncertainty about an answer. We're also seeing some slight differences in our urban respondents, which is interesting. So, like I said, it's a small snapshot of what we've been doing with the survey. So I hope it was interesting to you in some way. And I want to thank everybody else who's helped with the survey as well in a lot of different fashions. So thanks for that. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email me or pop them in the chat.
Thanks, Megan. Just one very, very brief question on
Sure.
the question you had about who is burning.
Yeah.
Anna Thompson Welch was wondering whether that question was lands-based or just the people conducting the burning, or if that was sort of up to the interpretation of the survey taker.
We wanted it to be either the land or the person, which that's the way we kind of wrote it into the question. Let's see. Oops, sorry, my arrow keys are getting a little crazy here. So yeah, we're saying where or who. And so when we kind of fashioned the answers, it was either, state land or burners, or federal land or burners, or private. And that could include themselves if they were also burning themselves.
Thank you.